All right. Hello, and welcome back to yet another fun-filled episode of the Hammercast. I'm joined again by none other than the man, the myth, the legend, Fabio Zonin, all the way from his fortress of Swolitude in Italy. We were, yeah, we were having a great conversation beforehand on all sorts of. I always wonder what would happen if I just like recorded all the conversations I had beforehand and like bundled them into like behind the scenes sort of a thing. I think
That,
people would really dig that.
that would be wonderful.
That would be. That
Need
would
to
be.
put lots of beeps in our conversations, but
Yeah, I would have to put a parental advisory label on it, I think, because there's always plenty of naughty words. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about, or quite a bit about it actually, bodybuilding, let's say some myths and facts, and in particular, the different types of it, and what bodybuilding is actually worth your time, and what bodybuilding you can avoid, and also why it kind of went on the outs with many in the strength world, but why there are some who are, in my opinion, and I think also in Fabio's opinion, wisely bringing it back bit by bit, but with some caveats. And so we're going to have a very good time chatting about this. One thing I will mention, although it's not really bodybuilding related, if you are interested in getting your entire body strong, fit, and healthy, you can get my 9-minute kettlebell and bodyweight challenge for free at 9minutechallenge.com. It takes about 30 seconds to learn each of the movements because they're all based around the gait pattern. So the idea is teaching your body how to move as one solid unit, which I know everybody here is going to enjoy. And although it seems like it would be flying in the face of this idea of bodybuilding with the different body parts and you're going to do the pec minor day and then the rhomboid day the next day or whatever. The reality is it works together very, very well. And so I think it'll suit you very well, particularly if you want to look good and move well also. So 9minutechallenge.com, and that is all yours. So Fabio, welcome back to the show.
thank you, Alex. Glad to be back here. And by the way, talking about our previous conversations, you and I speak in Italian actually when we
Yeah.
have our conversation, which means that very few people would understand. You would have to subtitle it and place a lot of asterisks and beeps and stuff like
Yeah, I think the other option would be that would be like the advanced behind the scenes. It's like you have to go through this Italian course first. Here's the vocabulary, the naughty vocabulary list of things that you're going to have to
that.
learn.
Parental advisory and sign an agreement that you are okay with that, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. I think we've got a new product on our hands. I think that would sell very, very well.
I'm
The
pretty sure. I found out, that I've been speaking at some conferences. By the way, speaking about bodybuilding, I'm working on a regular basis here with a Bodybuilding Academy. It's a school
mm,
called Sustainable Bodybuilding, and it's about natural bodybuilding. It's almost 10 years I've worked with them, and they really do a great job. And so I'm speaking to conferences, and while everywhere else people ask me, hey, be careful, don't use your current, be careful about your language,
yeah,
come in with some naughty words or stuff like that. And here they encourage me, please
nice.
forget to place some, bad words in between because people love it. And then they post reels of my speech and they just make sure that there is something there that because it does,
Yeah,
it does wake people up somehow,
I
especially
like it.
expected. Yeah.
People like that authenticity, and I think that in particular, when it comes to building the body, there's nothing that is more authentic than really making yourself as well developed as possible. So whether it's, let's say, swearing, to present your real feelings to the world, or training in such a way that it helps your body to develop the way that it's meant to be developed, at some point along the way, bodybuilding seemed like it fell by the wayside. Because, when I was younger, even like 20 years ago when I started training, it was like the primary mode of resistance training was you'd get like muscle and fitness off of I almost called it muscle and fiction. Jeff Newport likes to call it muscle and fiction. And so I'm in this habit of saying that now. And you would just do whatever workouts were in there. There was always something for abs and like, 6 different arm exercises and what have you. And I think what really resonated, this is my experience anyway, you have quite a bit more than I do, but for me, hearing Pavel's message of, you don't need 16 different exercises for your upper body and then, 20 for the lower body. You need something that is going to work the entire body and get you strong, get you in and out. And I think along the way, people kind of threw out the idea of the value of number one, let's say bodybuilding in any of its past forms, And slowly but surely, I think people are starting to take the stuff that worked and they're starting to re-inject it into their training. And given that you have such an extensive background in bodybuilding, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about its utility for people who are primarily interested in building strength. But, let's say secretly, they also kind of want people to like stare at them, when they're at the beach or, around the pool or even just wearing a t-shirt.
Here's the point. So I've been through all the different phases of bodybuilding. Just consider that I started training in 1983.
Wow.
Oh, that's 43 years ago.
Yeah.
And I did my first powerlifting meet in 1985, and the first bodybuilding meet in 1986. So I've been both a powerlifter and a bodybuilder. So I kind of, I was within both worlds.
Yeah.
And the gym where I was training was a bodybuilding, a weightlifting, and a powerlifting gym. So I was exposed to all different systems, ideas, and theories which coexisted in the gym.
Yeah.
And bodybuilding had an interesting evolution, but above all, bodybuilding has influenced also physical preparation in some forms. Initially, in a bad way, because the first bodybuilders. Let's go back to Reeves, Columbo, all those guys. They were strong, and they were training. They were lifters. I wouldn't say weightlifters or powerlifters. They were lifters. They were strongmen. And there were no machines at the time until, Arthur Jones started, building Nautilus and so on. Mike Mentzer came in. And so initially they would do what I believe is right, which is they would build the foundations through complex movements, fundamental exercises, and they would build their statue there. And then they started finding a way to isolate the muscles to refine. I'm thinking about, if you want to paint something, portrait, or if you want to build a statue, you don't start by painting the eyebrow, or you don't start by, looking how big the ears should be. And if you get the shape and the proportions first, right? And then as you want to perfect it, you add details. Now it's interesting because so initially, most bodybuilders were also strongmen, were also performance, were also powerlifters, were also weightlifters or whatever. And then with the introduction of machines, we made it popular, by the way, because
Mhm.
here's the thing. Training with fundamental exercises is freaking hard. No, it's
Oh
really
yeah.
hard to do, and it's not for everyone. I mean, you know how you feel after, 6 sets of squats or 10 sets of squat and so on.
Yeah.
And machine where people live their life seated, and it's interesting because they wake up in the morning, they sit for breakfast, then they sit on the toilet, and they sit in the car or the scooter to go to work, and then they sit in the office, right? And then they go to the gym and they sit on a stationary bike, and then they sit on a chest press, and they sit on a leg extension. It's pretty much the same thing, right? But and that makes it easy. I mean, make people comfortable. You're seated and you're training your legs. You're seated, you're training your pecs. There's no effort. You're seated and you're doing your cardio. And so that made it popular. So we have to thank bodybuilding for that on one end. And on the other end, uh, people started, thinking about too much about shape, form, and muscle. The thought became muscle-centric. And they totally forgot the function.
Yeah.
So you see huge bodybuilders that looked incredibly fit, and they go, they just climb around the stairs and they are gassed, or they have no idea on how to throw a ball, or have zero coordination, or they can't do a toe touch. Well, that's common with me also, but just that's in my case because I'm old and broken. But and that's a problem. I mean, it's interesting because you want to look fit and healthy, right? And you do actually, but you're not neither fit nor healthy, and you're not even able to move. And sometimes, it's interesting. You see, when I was a bodybuilder for some time, I was dive deep into bodybuilding. I saw some people overweight, that would look like, they couldn't move, and they were able to move way better than I could. There's something wrong here. So the different phases were, bodybuilding initially started by lifting. and then machines came in, and then everybody went to this idea of finding a way to isolate muscles, which was also pushed by the business of company that builds machine. I worked for three companies that build machine here in Italy, one major one, actually, one international, one of the biggest ones in the world. And they were looking how to isolate the muscle and how to make sure that the load is isotonic. So you load every single portion of the movement, blah, 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 blah. And then guess what? Sports were not used to have resistance training in their physical preparation.
Hmm.
And they started understanding the value, but they picked from bodybuilding. So I saw soccer players. It was interesting. There was a time in which at the Rimini Fitness Expo, it was a big company building machines that was a sponsor of a major football soccer team here in Italy, Juventus, right? And they had this truck with all the machines for the players. And they would do leg extensions to kick the ball more power. And trust me, if you do three sets of 12 reps with a leg extension, just because you extend your knee, that doesn't mean you can kick better.
Yeah.
Not at all. But this was the idea. And so it was, you know, and also the way people would execute the gestures, slow and control with a slow negative has nothing to do with real life. So that was a problem. Then Pavel, CrossFit, calisthenics. So then the functional training movement came into play. And all that was deleted. So now bodybuilding was the enemy, right? It's bad. It's bad for you. You got to it's all about movement and so on. So
Mhm.
we've been going, as it's always, through the extremes, right? Extreme bodybuilding, where I see now videos of people using a leg curl machine to do their biceps, and try to isolate every single, and place a little bit of external rotation here, a little bit. And so extreme on one end, and then extreme on the other one, which means everything that's related to bodybuilding is bad.
Hmm.
Which means, oh, you train your curls, you do your biceps, you're a big sissy. Uh,
Yeah.
well, no one ever called Arnold Schwarzenegger sissy.
Not to his face anyway.
No, but here's the point. The point is that, and also I've been probably not working out my arms for 10 years because I've been surfing on all those times.
Sure.
I remember we're talking about early 2000. I was speaking at the conference, and for bodybuilding, I brought up a program that was only based on fundamental exercises, and everybody thought that's impossible. You can't do bodybuilding that way. And no, it is possible. It probably, you don't get the same results as if you added some isolation movement. Now, this is interesting. Right now, there is a comeback, at least here in Italy, of isolation movement after a time in which, after the functional training movement, the response of the reply of bodybuilding was power bodybuilding. So let's go back to fundamental movements. Let's use also some body weight work. Let's add pull-ups. Let's do this and that, and add isolation movement where necessary, right? Which is the perfect approach.
Yeah.
You get the best of both worlds.
I
But
agree.
here's what happens now. Since that's hard, it's easier to do 4 sets of leg press than 4 sets of squat. So they're back to machines, right? And they say it's not necessary. We can do everything with isolation movements because champion A, B, C, X, Y, Z, now they're only training with machines and they're getting great results. They don't think that they're getting great results because they have a background of fundamental movements.
Yeah.
Right? So you can't start with that. So we've been through all the extremes, right? And right now I'm fighting. I had a speech at a Congress that was back in June. The title was "Why Fundamentals Are Fundamentals." I had to convince people that fundamentals are important for them into the bodybuilding world, right? Which, on the other hand, I have to convince people in our world, which is the world where you and I live,
Hmm.
strong first world, original strength worth, movement world, to say, hey, if you want to add some tricep extension or some curls, it's not a sin. because guess what? You may need it. You
Yeah.
know, so it's a matter of balance. It's a matter of the context. What are you using that exercise or that strategy for?
Hmm.
What is your goal? What is the context? What are your abilities? Where are you lacking in something, and so on and so forth.
You know, it's interesting that you say this because I've sort of independently come to the same conclusion, and I found, at least initially, that people were pretty resistant as well. And I think a part of it is that people have kind of a very myopic vision of what it means to be fit. You know, they have their own idea of like what they want to accomplish, and they mistake the, let's say, the principles for the strategies or the tactics. And so the closer their vision is, the harder it is for them to zoom out and see what the overall fundamentals are. And so what you brought up about needing to bring up weaknesses in certain muscle groups, and particularly to achieve balance, is like nail on the head. Because I remember, for instance, about 10 years ago, I had a notable disparity in like one of my triceps. I think it was like the right tricep. And, due to like an imbalance on the left side and, compensations or whatever. So I thought, okay, I'll just do some tricep extensions on that side and even it out. And it worked. Like for me, it's like the idea here is that I don't want to work myself into a potential injury 2, 3, 5 years into the future because I'm too afraid to do a quote unquote bourgeois bodybuilding exercise. But what people need to understand is that the whole purpose of exercise as we do it anyway is we're taking distilled movement patterns in the form of, let's say, compound exercises, whether it's a push up or a military press, and we're applying particular standards to it in order to make it easier to measure as well as ensure quality. And then along the way, if there's an issue, let's say if you have an issue with your mobility, nobody would say, oh, but I don't want to, pinpoint this mobility issue in my thoracic spine or in my external rotation on this shoulder or that shoulder. That's not functional. That's nobody would say this. But when it comes to the development of one of the muscles that's lagging behind and then getting in the way of their ability to, let's say, put more weight overhead or lift more weight off the ground, suddenly they balk. And it seems like it's totally a cultural thing because there's been this sort of a backlash against bodybuilding. So in addition to having this issue with, needing to defend the fundamentals to some people, it's also important, it seems, to try to convince people on our side that some basic bodybuilding is not only not bad, but it's actually like really good. So what are some of the things that you do in order to get, let's say, the kettlebell or the calisthenics or the barbell crew on board with the idea of, let's say, a power bodybuilding in particular, where the fundamentals and the compound exercises still reign supreme, but they have a lot of help when necessary from the isolation movements.
So, for instance, I give you one example. I'm going to go extreme, and I'm going to go with other examples. So, I got surgery on my shoulder.
Hmm.
Yeah, 2024 December, right? And they cut the tendon of the long head of the bicep. They cut it and they place it here. So I have a monocep now. I don't have a bicep anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it's still a bicep, but it's not biarticular.
Yeah.
So my long head of the bicep cannot help me doing the flexion anymore on my
Uh-huh.
right, which makes me weaker, which is very sad. Now, guess how my arm was after I got rid of the cast? It was
Probably a little bit weaker.
big as my wrist, right?
Yeah.
Didn't look good and didn't function well. Now, I could have worked with as many fundamental movement as I wanted to, but I would never have regained symmetry if I
Mhm.
didn't add some specific direct muscle work for the bicep. And also had to think about all the functions of the bicep. Because let's say if you tell anyone, you want to grow your bicep, what movement do? You
Curls.
you curl your so it's a flexion of your forearm on the arm, technically called, right?
Yeah.
And if you want to work both sizes, when you do your curls, you also raise your elbow because the long head works better. So I could
Mm.
not do that. But what many people don't know is that your bicep, its strongest action is supination.
Mm.
So when you can't force it too much with heavy weights, right? And you cannot do this part of the movement, the flexion of the arm anymore, because you don't have muscle cannot be involved there. and you can only curl, right? When you do a curl, your bicep works, but also your brachius radialis and also your brachialis anterior. So other more than one muscle work at the same time.
Mhm.
Very hard to target the bicep. The only thing that the bicep does and the others don't, because the brachialis anterior is attached to the ulna, and well, we don't need to go into biomechanics. However, you need a strong supination. But you need a strong supination if you're holding a dumbbell, you don't have really loading supination
Yeah.
unless you don't take a central grip and you grip
Mm.
the handle in a manner that you get more load in supination. Or
Hmm.
you can use a kettlebell to do simply some supination work.
Yeah.
So that's pure isolation, what bodybuilders would do.
Yeah.
Trust me, that was not useful. That was crucial for me.
Yeah.
Really crucial. So that was not, it was, yes, it was aesthetics because I didn't want to look asymmetrical. Now, by the way, I do agree with something, I think it was Dan John that said it. No matter what you preach and what you say, everybody at the end of the day likes to look better naked in front of the mirror.
Yeah.
So, I mean, some people, bodybuilders, will see aesthetics as a primary goal. Other people will see it as a pleasant side effect. I want to
Mhm.
get stronger, but I won't be disappointed if I grow some muscle, if I look toned, whatever.
Yeah.
But uh, in this case, it was about recovering some function, right?
Yeah.
And so it was important. But now add that to your routine, right? You are not a bodybuilder. You want to be stronger. Now, there's always a weak link. And that may be due to mobility, but it may be due to a type of mobility that you cannot regain.
Hmm.
So structural, the shape of your bones, how big your joints are. There may be several reasons for which you have a limitation there. And if you can't, so, and that's the reason for which people are built differently, and proportions,
Hmm.
and length of the leverage, and where exactly the tendon is attached on your bone. So some muscles will not respond like as others, but they are involved in a fundamental movement. So at some point, in some cases, you will need to target one muscle, the weak link of the chain, because you need to work on that one. And you may not do it because you want to look good. You may not want to do it because of aesthetics or proportions or whatever, but because it's useful to allow you to help you improve in a fundamental movement. And bodybuilding helps you a ton in this, finding a way to isolate a movement,
Hmm.
and which requires a little bit of knowledge of biomechanics, by the way, because it's not that easy. So, and also rehab, prehab, rehab, and post rehab,
Hmm.
return to play, basically. If you strain a muscle, if you get uh, and you get a damage, and you need to recover there, at some point you will have to target that specific muscle. Because here's the point, especially when you have a weakness or when you've suffered an infirm injury, just remember, and we all know this, our body is lazy. So if one movement requires a chain composed of four muscles, A, B, C, and D, right? And out of this chain, A is the strongest muscle and C is the weakest. Your body will keep using A and forget about C,
Hmm.
which means that sometimes if you don't do something for it, your imbalances will grow over time and may
Yeah.
also create some problem like lack of joint centration or whatever. So targeting, using some bodybuilding strategies to target the weak link sometimes not only allows you to perform better, but may allow you to function better and may also prevent injury.
Yeah.
So, should everybody do bodybuilding? No. But occasionally, when you need it, why not?
Yeah.
Does
Yeah.
that make
Mark
sense?
Rifkin has a great line. He says that natural bodybuilders always age the best because, they're focused in particular, or at least the people who have aged the best do some natural bodybuilding because they focus on making sure that there's balance in the muscles. They're not over focusing on any one particular movement or muscle group or anything like that. And I think a common mistake that I see for people who are very knowledgeable or very well meaning is that they mistake the idea that because a particular movement requires the use of a muscle, that it properly develops that muscle as well. Like I wrote something just yesterday about like not every exercise is a core movement just because the core has to brace. At some point or another, you're going to need to directly train your core. And there are people who are opposed to that too. They're like, oh, I'll just squeeze my core really hard when I squat or do deadlifts or swings. It's like that is going to help, but you're also going to reach a point at which you just can't continue to squeeze it harder and harder if you're not training it dynamically. It can't only be static.
Yeah, and also, here's the point. It may not be enough.
Yeah.
I mean, it may not be enough, or it may be a weak link.
Hmm.
And I'm also thinking, I give you an example, personal example. So I always had uh, good lower body when I was bodybuilding,
Hmm.
but I was lacking in hamstrings, right? That means that when I would squatting or even deadlifting, if you see my conventional that is very squatty, uh, I was knee dominant and glute dominant, right? So does that affect my powerlifting skills? Not at all. When I was competing powerlifting, no big deal. I had a strong deadlift. Who cares? But when I would go on stage with bodybuilding, well, you could see there was something missing there.
Yeah.
So need to focus on that area. And on the other end, guess what? So I've been powerlifting for several years. Then I did 1 year of bodybuilding, and then I went back to powerlifting. So I worked on my hamstrings. I went back to powerlifting. I got my PR in deadlift. Oh,
Nice.
so probably doing some direct work for my hamstrings was a good idea.
Yeah.
I never thought about that. That's the point. And you know what is interesting? Now I work parallel. Oh, and by the way, you said one thing very important. You said natural bodybuilding
Hmm.
because they're different worlds.
Yeah.
Uh, why? Not because natural bodybuilders have learned that if they cannot take hormones and they cannot take peptides and they cannot take insulin, GH, growth factors or whatever that allow you to basically grow whatever you do,
Hmm.
or grow a muscle locally, which is possible now, right? Now, the only way you can get organic growth is stimulate your hormones, stimulate
Hmm.
your system, which means, hey, it's not going to happen with a leg extension
No.
or it's going to happen with squats and deadlifts.
Hmm.
You need those type of stimuli to get your machine going, right? So natural bodybuilders age very well
Hmm.
compared to bodybuilders who, well, are not natural because they can afford to avoid certain type of exercises. However, if you look at the bodybuilders I used to follow, in the 90s and the 200s, you can see those who are healthy now. You can see the way they're trained.
Hmm.
One exception is Ronnie Coleman because he really destroyed himself.
Yeah.
But many others, you can see that those who train with fundamental movements and could move, even their age, they still look good.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
still in good shape.
It,
They still move well.
it's great you mentioned that because I was thinking about that too. Ronnie in particular, he had come in with some injuries. I think he got his back injured playing football as a kid, and every time he would get injured, he would just keep training harder and harder. So he was an example of somebody who was doing the right things, but he wasn't, let's say, maybe patient or waiting for the right moment. He was always moving straight forward. But then you got guys like Lee Haney, who was, I mean, he's I think roughly the same age as Coleman, maybe even a little bit older. He's never had any knee injuries, hip injuries. He's never had any major surgeries whatsoever, any major injuries. And even in his 60s, he looks great. It's rare to see.
And this applies, by the way, this applies to all sports. The more you ask your body and the more you push into pain, into, injury, uh, the less you're going to endure. And
Mhm.
also, but I understand you win the Olympia for so many times in a row, you can't give up.
Yeah,
You're going to give up a few years of your life,
yeah.
but you're going to be rich, or you're going to reach your goal, or you're going to be a super champion that no one has beaten before, whatever. You can have some reasons. It could be a deliberate choice. It
Hmm.
may be. What doesn't make sense to me is someone who's not a winner, that kills himself or herself, knowing that all they're going to get is probably a $20 cup, after a regional competition.
Yeah.
That doesn't justify. And also the expense and what some products do to your health. I mean, you're basically cutting your life when you use
Yeah.
certain. So the natural bodybuilder usually is wiser. It's choices. But what I mean is their training is wiser because they have to include certain type of exercises, but
Right.
also, and this is interesting, they have to move well because
Yeah.
and so working with bodybuilders and strength athletes at the same time, I have to convince strength athletes to use something of bodybuilding. When I speak with bodybuilders, I have to tell them, hey, before you do anything else, you need to learn how to move. Now, I've been a judge in bodybuilding competition for many years, right? And when I saw the athletes comparing it with each other on stage, according to where they had weaknesses or lack in muscle development or whatever, I could say where they had a lack in movement.
Hmm.
Because guess what? If you can develop very wide lats, very wide back, but if you don't have T-spine mobility and scapular mobility, there's no way you're going to fill that back in. You're not going to get your rhomboids, your trapezius. You're not going to get your spinal rectus. So you're going to have a wide and empty back, right?
Yeah.
And same applies for your lower limbs. No ankle mobility, no calves, and so on. So the idea is natural bodybuilders learned, at least the smart ones, the winning ones, learn that they need to follow a process. They need to be able to move first.
Hmm.
Then they got to get strong, and then they got to build. Uh, let's say we say, how would you say, raw muscle mass.
Yeah.
And then they do the isolation movement when they get close to competition, not
Yeah.
all year. On the other hand, strength athletes usually they move well, you know, and usually they love, fundamental patterns and so on. But they need to understand at some point they need some fillers for their gaps.
Hmm.
That comes from bodybuilding.
Yeah.
I have in my home gym, which I've been training now for many, many years, I only had three barbells, three complete sets of bumpers, full set of double kettlebells from 8 to 48, right? And two power racks, and pretty much, and dips and whatever. And pretty much it, bench, you know. And I included some pulleys that I can attach to the power rack to do some cable work.
Hmm.
Trust me, it made the difference. I don't use it that much. I mean, it's probably 10% of my training session,
Yeah.
but then 10% makes a huge difference. Huge difference.
Absolutely. Now, in particular with the kettlebell crowd, I think people have a tendency to view, the kettlebell is uniquely suited to stuff like ballistic lifts and overhead movements. And I think that the people who really gravitate toward kettlebell training in particular gravitate especially hard away from bodybuilding, even though, like you mentioned, Dan John's 100% spot on. People still want to look really good. And I've never met a kettlebell lifter who, let's say did a different kettlebell protocol, put on some extra muscle, and wasn't happy with the result. They got the strength they wanted. They also look better. So, how do you convince people who are primarily focused around kettlebell lifting to do, like, let's say, to inject some basic bodybuilding? And, like, what would be the movements that you would recommend that they start with in particular so that they're not overwhelmed, but they're kind of moving in the right direction?
Well, first, it's interesting because some people I have to convince. Many people ask me about it.
Hmm.
So I give an example. You know Sven Rieger, right?
Yeah, of
Our German senior, and
course.
the listeners know. He only uses kettlebells and does pretty much presses, snatches, and double snatches, and lifting and lift stones and so on.
Sure.
He takes his shirt off. He could go to bodybuilding competition right away. So he doesn't need it. So I would have
The
to
German
convince.
genetics. Yeah.
Yeah, I would have to convince him, right?
Yeah.
Other people, they do train a lot. but at some point they don't like the way they look,
Hmm.
they come and ask. So in some cases, it's you have to, you know, suggest. In some other cases, they they're shy, but they come and ask. Should I? What could I do for, you know? So those who I have to convince to, basically, the strategy is always uh, find out what their goals are and explain how something could help them reach their goals.
Hmm.
So, for instance, if someone wants to press, beats for reps, or someone wants to do heavy pistols or want to do whatever, then it's easy because if you include this assistance exercise, if you call it direct muscle, it's interesting. I created some programs, right? And uh, I give programs. If I say I can classify the movements in specialized variety, assistance, or DMW, direct muscle work,
Hmm.
some people ask me, oh, there's no DMW here. Can you add it to the program? Some people, if they see DMW, say, no, give me a specialized variety lift. And I just use the same lift to just change the acronyms.
You just give the different name. Yeah.
A good coach, secret of a very good coach is having your students do what you know is best for them while convincing them at the same time that you're doing what they're asking you for.
Yep.
But the point is that if I explain that that specific isolation move will help them reaching their goal
Hmm.
or will make them more resilient towards injuries while they are reaching their goal. There is an article by Steve Friedis, which I co-authored on strongfirst.com, where we had that sort of from the rack pressing your kettlebell from,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Which is a great exercise for a rotator cuff, you know, and shoulder joint centration, stabilizing, and so on. So that's an isolation movement, by the way,
Sure.
right? And you get your delts in and so on. If you tell a lifter that that's for hypertrophy of the delts, they won't they won't do it. If you tell a bodybuilder, they will do it because it's hypertrophy. So since
Yeah.
it's things, just give the right message, right?
Exactly.
And there is an interesting you brought to mind, and I think it's something with you and I should talk about to develop. Do you know who is Mario Ciballeri? Ever heard this name?
Mario Civelli. Isn't he the first guy who brought kettlebells to Italy?
Yeah.
Am I?
So
Yeah.
he was one of the first RKCs worldwide. I think
Yeah.
it's from one of the first RKCs in the early 2000s,
Oh,
right?
wow.
He came to Italy and he was the one who started talking about kettlebells. And then he's a publisher, reached out to Pavel and published Pavel's book in Italian because of this guy, right?
Right. Yeah.
And he has a background in powerlifting and bodybuilding also. And he trained many bodybuilders. He passed away during the pandemic, by the way.
Ah, very sad. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and he's great. He was a great friend. So miss him so much, especially because if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't know what kettlebells are.
No, for
I
sure.
before meeting Pavel. So
Yeah.
main thing is he had developed a full set of kettlebell exercises for bodybuilders or for hypertrophy for people who just train with kettlebells.
Wow.
I think it would be great to, dig them out of the grave because there's so much great stuff you can do with a kettlebell that you cannot even do with a barbell.
Wow.
I just give you an example. Think about this. You do a dumbbell curl, right? And again, supination may be a problem, right? And there's no more load at the top position. But if you do a curl with a kettlebell in your hand, now the kettlebell will always point down. So at the beginning, you have no load. However, as you reach this point and the kettlebell tilts here and you do this, you have the weight is displaced here, and you get more tension in the top position of the curl, where
Yeah.
dumbbell you would have no more tension, right?
Right.
If you do instead of dumbbells, do flies with a pair of kettlebells. Once you get here, you get extra load in the final part of range of motion.
Right.
I do a lot of kettlebell pullovers, for instance. I do a lot of that. I do elbow extensions behind the neck,
Yeah.
standing with a kettlebell, because I can get load where I would not be able to get load with a different implement.
Hmm.
And there are so many exercises that can be interesting with kettlebells, you know. So something to consider.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned the pullover. Actually, I just recently did a video on those for my YouTube channel, and I think they're awesome with the kettlebell. And so few people do them. I mean, I think Pavel mentions them in Return of the Kettlebell. And there was a time at which I think when people were reading that book a little bit more closely, there were more people practicing it. But whether it's straight arm or bent arm, it's such an excellent exercise. And it's like a perfect accompaniment to any sort of double overhead lift. Again, great for developing the chest. And I'm really interested in hearing about the curls. You know, I wrote an article a couple of years ago for Strong First on developing the arms by training them directly, and kettlebell curls were a part of them. But I just had kind of standing curl variation. But what you mentioned with curl in particular makes me think, you know, that sort of awkward position at the top where you gotta do that. Imagine if you do that with a Scott curl. You know, you've got your
Yeah.
arm over a bench, and it's like
And
double
you
the
can
tension.
do, I mean, I don't have a kettlebell here with me. I only have this fake one right here. But
Yeah.
you know, if you with the logo by the
Oh,
way.
I like it.
So if you hold it like this, right, and you get here, you get an effect. But if you keep it in your hand like that, you have a different
Mm.
effect. So you can get so many different grips. There is one now, I can't find it anymore. But because I'm not sure if it was a DVD or if it was still in VHS. Now, there was, you know what? It's here. Okay. The Russian Kettlebell Challenge was a very famous book by Pavel. It
Oh
also
yeah.
had video, right? But there was one video that was sold by Dragon Door. I don't think it was very popular, and I think it's lost now, which is this one. I mean, I need to unblur my screen. Hold on.
Put
Let
it in
me.
front of your chest, and I think that'll work. There we go. Yes, more Russian kettlebell challenges.
There's so much stuff in here. So many unknown exercises you can do with kettlebells. And trust me, there can be even more. You can. I also experimented using kettlebells with bands,
Mm.
to
I
check.
I've done that before. Incredible.
There's so much you can do. And you know what? You made me think that it's something that should be developed.
Yeah.
A program with, kettlebells that include the movement we know and the ballistics, but adding that. And here's the interesting part. The reason for which, so bodybuilding became more and more complicated, and you had machines for everything. So initially we had, you had the pulling machine, vertical and horizontal, and then you had a pack deck or whatever, and a Smith machine, and then through the years you get machines for everything. To
Yeah.
me, for instance, the crunch machine or the hyper extension machine or the deep machine, there's nothing that's just dumber than that.
Yeah.
So, and that was driven by one reason, because of course, the companies, they needed to sell machines, which is
Yeah.
great. It's their business. I have nothing against it. So it became more and more complicated. And the contrast was this guy tells you you can train with one kettlebell, home, uh, handheld at gym. So we go minimalist, and I love it. You know, I love it because to me, knowing people like us, I go on vacation, I do handstand push-ups, pistols, and I train the entire body.
Hmm.
I pull up, I find a branch of a tree and I do my pull-ups. I got everything I need. I find any place to hang, I do Australian pull-ups. I can do that, right? A bodybuilder gets lost if you don't have a gym.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we go minimalist, and it's great, it's enough, but you can get all. You can have it all.
Yeah.
However, here's the interesting compromise. What if you have a minimalist program that works for you and guarantees your results, and you add the rest to it as an optional? Meaning, no more excuses. You have time, you can train 75 minutes,
Yeah.
60 minutes, whatever it is, 4 times a week, and you do a full plan. You got to go on vacation, you got a business trip, you have no excuses to skip your training. You just remove the extra, right?
Exactly.
And do the basics. But you can enjoy, you can get best of both worlds. It's like you and I like steaks, right?
Oh yeah.
So if I honestly, and it's also a business thing. If I invest $120 for a big piece of steak, and I get a side of broccoli and a baked potato, right? And I'm seeing half of my steak that I have a hard time finishing it. Am I going to eat my broccoli and my potato and leave the meat there? Am I going to finish the meat and leave the potato and broccoli out? Second one, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, it's that could be the same. There is the main work for you, and there is everything that stays around. The
Yeah.
feminist philosophy tells you just uh 80-20 principle, right? So
Exactly.
remove everything that's not necessary and just do what is necessary. On the other end, complete would say get also you're not happy enough to get at 80% with 20% effort. You want to get 100%. Okay, you're gonna do the whole thing,
Yeah.
but you don't have to do that all the time,
Yeah.
right?
Agreed. Yeah, you know what? I think the other thing too is psychologically. You mentioned this earlier about the need to frame certain exercises as being in line with what the people want. You know, this is gonna be for hypertrophy, or this is going to be for resilience. This is gonna help make sure your shoulders feel better. You know, whatever the case may be. Both can be true, but one of them they're going to. It's like the kid doesn't want to eat the food on the spoon. So you're like, oh, here comes the airplane. Well,
Yeah,
now all of a sudden they want it.
that's the idea.
Adults are identical, and I think that people have this idea that, let's say with the compound exercises, let's say they're like, well, if I'm going to add all these other bodybuilding exercises, everything needs to progress. And it's like there's only really one primary goal. Maybe it's to get stronger at the compound movement. So the others don't have to, they're not likely to progress as fast. You're not going to go from, let's say, 10 kilo lateral raises to 20 kilo in 8 weeks. It's just not going to happen. So put that on easy, make the compounds your primary focus.
This is the important thing. Now, when you get main lifts, you program them, you create a progression.
Yeah.
So all my plans, the plans I follow myself, the plan prescribed, I have starting point, I have a test, I have a starting point, I have a progression, and I have a test at the end, right? That applies to the main lift. Few lift where I want to track the variables. And then the rest, I say, okay, add, 4 sets of 8 curls with an RPE of 7-8.
Hmm.
No specific progression. You don't need it. It's a side dish. It's not your main dish.
Exactly.
And it's interesting because you said, if you think about, you have to sell something. Let's say sell doesn't sound good, but you have to present something according to person's goal, right? So all right, I like to improve my T-spine mobility, my hip mobility, ankle dorsiflexion, and my overall mobility and coordination, swings and get-ups. I want to get stronger, swings and get-ups. I want to lose
Yeah.
weight, swings and get-ups. Actually,
Yeah.
most of the time the recipe is just the same,
Yeah.
especially with, I wouldn't say beginners, I would say non-advanced athletes. With people who start, whether you're looking for to get stronger, to move better, or to lose weight or whatever, the recipe, it's if not the same, is very similar.
Yeah.
Fast athletes need that specialization, that specificity, right? So you may change the number of sets, you may change the rest, you may change that, but the recipe is pretty much that one. It doesn't really
Exactly.
make. So it's the way you present it, to people, and it's not cheating with people. Is that you as a coach, you have the knowledge, you know how to reach the goal, right?
Hmm.
And you know that some strategy and exercise serve multiple purposes. So you know that whether the goal is hypertrophy or resilience, that prescription works for both.
Yeah.
But if somebody asks you for hypertrophy, you can say, okay, we're going to do a move drill for your mobility. And if the person asks for more mobility, you're not going to say we're going to build your hamstrings. That's pretty much the idea. But it doesn't. And yeah, pretty much that's the idea.
Exactly. Yeah. People have wants and they have needs, and you got to make sure that they're doing both of them in order for them to get there where they want to go. Because a big part of the training, I think this is probably a big part of the reason why so many people don't like doing the fundamentals. I like to say fundamentals more than like or foundational stuff more than maybe like basics because people think, well, but I'm not a basic person. I'm a little more advanced. Everybody has this kind of like idealized vision of themselves, and people also don't like being humble. There's a lot of things that is great about strength training for the character building of it. But if you tell people it's going to build your character, the first thing that comes in mind is, that's a euphemism for this is going to suck, which is obviously true. But that's the point. It's like you overcome it, you get better, and it's difficult to ask people to take that leap of faith, no matter what they're doing. And so you've got to present it in a way. Same with people who like machines. They like it because they seem more approachable. It's a position they're more familiar with. They're not like standing and lifting and feeling awkward or uncoordinated. They're sitting and they're moving and they feel like they're making progress. And I think that's important. And it's important too for people like that to get used to doing some, let's say, swings and get ups, even on a basic level.
And one way to convince people is just you don't need to tell them you're testing them or prove them. Actually, if
Yeah.
you don't, it's better, but test them. I'll give you an example. Uh, so you prescribe to your student uh, goblet squats, right? And he hates it, right? And you explain the reason for which you're doing goblet squat, which is okay. But suddenly, after you test them to see what is the right weight, how many reps they can do, and so on. So, whatever initial test you do. Suddenly, after 4 or 5 lessons, right, you redo the same test without telling them you're testing. And you say, hey, remember, lesson number 1, you only did 4 reps with this, and you're not 12 now. And you're using. So you show them they progress. This is interesting because people love to do what they're good at and
Yes.
to do what they suck at. So the reason for which, all the gym rats want to do the bench press, because it works. It's easy to do, at least if it's done not properly, and you get lots of progress, right?
Yeah.
And whenever you want to do something, people who are strong in press, they want press, right? People who are strong in squat, they want to squat, and so on. People want to do over and over what they're good at because it feeds their ego, right? But if you show people that they had a great improvement in something they were bad at, that will become the main focus because
Yeah.
when they see a result, so that's a good way to, without trying having to convince them, let the actions speak, let the results speak, and then they love it.
Hmm.
For example, 2 examples. One is interesting. I had my coach when I was competing bodybuilding. My coach, he used to prescribe in his plan walking lunges. I
Hmm.
I hated them. So I went for the check, after 6 weeks. And he goes, can you just give me something else? I really hate walking lunges. And he goes, if you don't like them, it's because you're not good at it. If you're not good at it, it's because you have a weakness there. If you have a weakness there, we have to fill that gap. If we have to fill that gap, you need to do your walking lunges. So you will keep doing walking lunges in every single program until you like them, right? So like 8 weeks later, I go for the next check and tell him, you know what? I start liking, I like walking lunges now. I was expecting to remove them from the program. Right? He says, oh, good, oh, good. So there's no reason for stop doing them. So
Yeah.
I had to do walking lunges until the competition, basically. So this is one thing. The other thing is the Turkish kettle. Now, you know that I'm not the most mobile person in the world.
Certainly.
We knew each other for many years, but you
Yeah.
know that I improved that compared
Oh
to
yeah.
many years ago, even though now age is coming in the way, right?
Sure.
So my biggest struggle when I took my RKC level 1 was the Turkish get up.
Hmm.
Because, if you're not mobile in your T-spine, your hips and so on, Turkish get up can be challenging for someone.
Certainly.
And coming from powerlifting and past years of bodybuilding, I didn't get the reason for the Turkish get up. Now we're talking about not 20, but almost 20 years ago. Uh, and I was thinking, what muscles does it develop? I had that bodybuilding thing.
Yeah.
I hated it. I hated it because it didn't give me any sort of satisfaction because it was challenging. I had to
Yeah.
fight to find the positions. I had to fight to go from one position to the other one and so on. until I was able to do it with 48. Guess what?
I
That's my
love
favorite exercise. You
them.
know,
Yeah.
I mean, uh, every training session I do starts with 5 get-ups with 16 kilos, not
Yeah.
with a heavy weight. The reason is because with 16 kilos, mobility and coordination wise is harder than with 40,
Yeah.
if you're strong. And I would never give up the get up. It's one of my favorite. And it was the exercise I hated the most. So results, it gave me so much in terms of improvement. So results are, your best advisor. You get results,
Absolutely.
and then you start loving things that you hated.
Absolutely. It reminds me too. It's funny you should say that because I remember reading a book that was a book of a collection of programs. I forget the name now, but Jeff Newport put it out some years ago, and he said the same thing: is that he didn't like the Turkish getup, and Pavel overheard him say that at an RKC. So he said, "Jeff, you're going to be teaching the Turkish getup," and so he was then. Put on the spot to do it, and similarly, he also made it a point to do a lot of them to the point where he got to actually liking them. And I think this really also goes back, for any coaches who are listening to this, that I interviewed a Norwegian hypertrophy expert named Berge Fagerli a couple of years ago on my podcast, and really smart dude. And he said, it's sort of like a common thing to say that like strength training is a and muscle building, it's an art and a science. And he said that, but he said, but I think it's more art than science because a lot of it comes down to what the individual trainee likes the most and what they're willing to stick to. And a lot of the stuff that we talked about too is like working through the psychology of the individual, what they're going to like, how to use a little reverse psychology to get them to like something, whether it's testing it later and letting them see that they got some results, even if they weren't training it a whole lot or they were just training it very minimally. And this isn't the sort of a thing that you can periodize. This is the sort of a thing that's like the art of coaching that
Yeah.
gets people to do putting all of the biomechanics and the kinesiology and the current modern strength science into action. There's a really important blend that needs to happen, and so getting people to do the stuff that they would otherwise not do, and despite how well it would work, you can't have a gun to their head all the time. You gotta coax them into it.
Think about that, how many things that are good for you and you should do it,
Yeah.
but you don't do. For instance, broccoli are good for you. I hate broccoli.
Yeah.
I should eat broccoli really. I just don't, right?
Yeah.
So there's many things that so you can give all the scientific rationale to someone to convince them to do something they don't really want to do.
Hmm.
Until they want to do it, it's not going to happen.
Exactly.
So you need to, but if you need to find a way that they will be willing to accept it and find a way that we'll start enjoying it.
Hmm.
And so again, perfect program on paper doesn't really work if the person doesn't stick to it. And people, it's like a medicine. You're willing to take a medicine while you're really ill. When you start feeling better, even if antibiotics, right? Doctor gives you and tells you got to finish this for 7 days. After 3 days, you feel better, and you don't take it for the next 4 days, and you get ill again. This is how human beings are built, you
Hmm.
know. So if you are in a situation in which you have to, right? How many people quit smoking when they were diagnosed lung cancer, you know? And there
Yeah.
are people who got the lung cancer and didn't quit smoking because they don't want to do it. So, this is why it's an art. As a coach, you need to give some good reason, which is not just convincing them scientifically that something works for
Yeah.
doing what is good for them. And sometimes you need to give up. You need to find a way to find a compromise to have them do something that's pretty much like it, you know,
Hmm.
or find a way to make it more enjoyable. Um, for instance, I had to give some medications to my dog in the past weeks, and the only way to get him to swallow them was wrap them in bacon.
Yeah.
That's why. So that was the solution. That's what you have to do as a coach, right?
Yeah.
And I've been listening to the presentation. We had our Strong First Italy instructor meeting beginning of the month, I
Hmm.
think. Or it was no, end of June. and had a presentation by Marco Scappellini, one of our instructors. He was talking about group training, right? And now usually people have, have the movement prep, they have the central little bit of technique, then they have the real training, and then whatever, they may have some cardio, some finishes, some whatever. And so he said that he alternates, he has the initial movement prep, some skill practice, the real training session, right? And then he always ends, one session is with a finisher, cardio work. One is with a pump, which means both they feel the muscles work, and one with his fun, challenges, right? And he says the finisher, the pump, and the challenges and the fun is not what is giving my students the results. The central part, the training, is what gives my students the results.
Mm-hmm.
But that final part is a reason for which they stick, and they keep coming to the training sessions, to classes. And guess what? He said is the part that not only probably is the less useful, it may be a little bit detrimental, but if he keeps them sticking to the classes, I'm okay with that, you
Yeah.
know. And the interesting part is they said my students think that that's the part that works because they feel the pump, they feel the burn, they feel that their heart rate is high, they're running out of gas. They don't know it's all the rest, but I
Yeah.
don't care. I sold it, you know. I guarantee I give the results at the end. And once you gave results to your students, guess what? You get to a point in which you don't need to convince them anymore.
Exactly.
Some long-time athletes, I still, designed a program for them that uh, one is our former hairdresser of my wife, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've been training her I think you met her, Tatiana, when you came to Italy.
I might have.
Uh, yeah, I think I trained her for 20 years, probably
Wow.
even more, right? And now she came with a question, right? Like I've been on vacation. I was finished week 7, and I want to start with week 8. Can I start a program all over again? I said, no, you need to start from week 4. And she goes, but can't I? My reply in text was, follow the orders. She said, okay, right? So she doesn't question anymore because she knows that what I do for her is good for her.
Yeah.
You acquire, you gain, you conquer that level of trust over time.
Exactly.
Initially, you don't have to convince. You need to make them buy in.
Yeah.
They need to be enthusiasts. They don't have to, all right, I don't like it, but I will do it because, it's like a diet. If you change the term from diet to nutritional philosophy, the seconds is easier to stick to.
Yeah.
Because you say I'm on a diet. Diet means restriction, means giving up something you really love, right?
Exactly.
Nutritional philosophy, right, is different because you decided to eat this way because it makes you feel better and you enjoy what you like and you can enjoy your cheat meal, whatever, but you decided this is the way that works for you. And the term itself it aims to long-term compliance.
Yeah.
Diet, program, plan, it's something that you want to do, medical prescription,
Mm-hmm.
it's something like you do for a while because you got a problem to solve, but then
Exactly.
you can't wait to give up that, right?
And go
So,
back to the thing you were doing before that got you to
exactly.
the point where you needed it. Yeah.
Which, yeah, which is, I mean, they will hire us again, but it's not the goal, you
No,
know.
exactly. You want to get them to the point where they can start to spread the word themselves and encourage their own friends and family members to improve their own lives. Because, again, it's a strong first motto. Strength has a greater purpose.
As a coach, I won when my student doesn't need me anymore. I
Yeah.
just send them a program every 6 weeks or 8 weeks.
Yeah.
That's all they need, right? Or even not that. They can build their own programs and they show it to me and say, oh, that's very well.
Yeah.
Some of them don't need to become a coach. They don't care. But, the fact that the less they need me, which means also less they pay me, but, but that's okay. I get new students. The less they need me, if they don't need me anymore, they need me once in a while for an advice, I won because I have educated the person.
Yeah.
I haven't forced them into something. I have educated them. Now training well has become part of their life. That's winning, you know.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. That's exactly what it's all about, is getting them to do what they should do, getting them to want to do the stuff that they should do, and trust in the process. It's sort of a thing that takes patience. We as coaches understand that results take time, they take patience, but similarly, convincing your own students to adopt something new, you also have to be patient and realizing that it'll take time before they start to see the results and before they're totally convinced. The time has come to start adding in hypertrophy or to start adding in mobility or to do the walking lunges or whatever else it is that they don't like to do. And before you know it, they'll be like, when can we do more of this? When can we go a little heavier? When can we, so on and so forth?
Yeah, that's the point. And you know how I won my war against walking lunges?
Hmm.
Simply trying to cover, cover a longer distance. I
Yeah.
had a bit at the gym, and when I was able to cover that distance without stopping, keeping the rhythm, I would go to a short distance again, adding some weight. So I needed to add, it was not in the plan, some progression to it, because every time I reached one of my many milestones, that motivated me to keep doing them.
Yeah.
And I did them with a purpose, but also I enjoy doing it because I enjoyed the challenge. So I had to put my own bacon on my medicine. That's,
Absolutely. Eventually, you get to that point where you're putting your own bacon on the medicine. You're taking the medicine. You
yeah,
know how to manipulate yourself, and so you can use it to your advantage. So,
yeah.
well, very cool. Well, I think we've given the listeners a hell of a lot to think about and hopefully to put into action. Where can people find you online so they can follow you and soak up some more of your wisdom?
Well, they can find me on Instagram, of course, which is xfab_69. Facebook, Fabio Zonin. They can find me. I have a website, uh, fabiozonin.com, and some strong first events around the world and in Israel with you in September. Just can't wait.
Absolutely.
Listeners, I love this guy, not sexually. I mean, I love this guy. We've been I know each other since 2012 or
12.
12,
Yeah.
and I always love every single time I have a chance to spend some time with this guy and work with this guy and chat with this guy. There's always to learn. So listen to
Likewise.
him.
Thank you kindly. Yes, and likewise with me. It never feels like work, even when we're teaching, even when we're, preparing lesson plans for the students at the various different courses or whatever. It always feels like it's a vacation, and I always have a blast. And especially in Italy, it's been a little while since I've been there, so you've given me a good excuse to
Yeah,
potentially come back
and
in
also,
September.
we have fun here because we're above the lines, but yeah,
Of course, and
you and I
that
have
stuff.
fun wherever we go. So
Absolutely. Yeah, that stuff will stay in Italy and won't go on the behind the scenes footage stuff
nope,
like.
nope, nope.
Yeah, that stays there. Well, Fabio, thank you again so much. This has been a pleasure having you back on. And folks, follow Fabio online. I highly recommend it. He's always got great material, great insights, and really doubly encourage you to go to any live event that he is teaching or even present at. It's an experience that you don't get almost anywhere else. He's got like an infectious vitality, and as you can tell, we love talking about training and mixing it in with life and deeper lessons. It's not about the bell; it's about who you become. And Fabio has always embodied that. And so I highly encourage you follow him, listen to him, and do your level best to get as jacked as possible. So Fabio, thank you again for coming on the show.
Well, it's my pleasure.
And folks, as always, have fun and happy training.